So today we're going to talk about sharpening chisels and gouges. And I have an example here that is a mortising chisel. It's real thick, bulky. But what you see is that there's a back and there's a bevel. And these two planes meet at kind of a single line. And that line is the active edge. That's what's doing the cutting. And over time, that line can get damaged. Various things can happen to it. We'll discuss that a little bit. You need to routinely maintain. And so when I talk about honing, I am referring to a working edge that's already been prepared, but has some damage, some slight damage to it, some dulling, maybe some nicks out of it that need to be taken care of. And honing will do that. However, I'm not talking about something where I get a major chip out of the gouge, or maybe where I want to reshape the profile. Let's say I want a rounded tip on this rather than a square tip. When I want to take care of that sort of problem, then I go back and regrind. Both honing and grinding, at least in my vocabulary, however, are different than initial chisel preparation. Oftentimes when you get a chisel from the factory, this back will not be smooth, and nor will the bevel. And they really both need to be very plain surfaces that meet on this line in order for the honing to work, in order for the chisel to work properly. So when you buy a new chisel, one of the first things you want to do is lap the back, lap the bevel, and establish this cutting edge very carefully. And then at that point, you can go ahead and take care of damage during use with honing, and you can go in and change the profile with grinding. But if you don't lap these surfaces correctly from the factory, you're really fighting an uphill battle in using these things. So I'm not going to talk about lapping these surfaces. You can do it any number of ways. You get a scary sharp method. You can do it on a belt sander upside down on your bench. You can use a grinding wheel. You can use whetstones. There's more information out there on this than you probably care to read. But if you get stuck with it, I recommend going out to the Sawmill Creek Neander section. Ask those guys. They are very knowledgeable and can help you out. So let me just review some of the damage, though, that can occur to a chisel tip. So here I've got kind of a real crude representation of this chisel. And I've got my bevel and my back. This is the back. And this is the working edge then. This should be a line if I knew how to draw. And over time, as you're using this, you're whacking on it with a mallet, or you're prying a little bit, you'll find that you get little defects that show up in here. Typically little chip outs, which I've tried to represent with these triangles. In a carving gouge, when that occurs, a couple of things will happen. You will feel the gouge get harder to push through the wood. And then also in the path that you're carving, you'll see little striations, lines that start showing up in the carving. And that's a telltale sign. Those lines will map up one for one with these chip outs. And that's an absolute telltale sign that it's time to go back and hone your gouge. And I suppose the other thing that can occur over time is that you literally can round this tip a little bit, which would also dull it down. But I really think that these tear outs, these chip outs, are probably the predominant type of defect that occurs as you're using the chisel, especially with bench chisels or mortise chisels that you're pounding on with a mallet. So just realize that's what's going on. Now, normally for really small, that you can't see with your naked eye, for really small defects, you can go back and hone the gouge, and that will take care of those. If the chips get really large, or the larger they get, especially if you can see them with your naked eye, you may have to go back and grind. And by grinding, I mean you have to go back and take a sizable amount off the bevel so that a new edge gets set, which is past those defects. So in the second podcast, we will talk about regrinding a surface. In the first podcast, though, I'm going to assume that we've got these really tiny defects that you can't really see with the eye, but they might be visible in your carving surface, or you can just feel that your carving tool is not as sharp as it needs to be. And that's called honing, and we're going to discuss that next. So here I've got another 8-inch slow-speed grinder. But what I've done is underneath there's 2 bolts that hold the motor on the stand. I've taken those out, picked up the motor, and rotated it 180 degrees so that instead of the wheel coming towards me like this, like it does with the hard cutting surfaces, it's actually spinning away from me. It's really important to remember that, because if you have with the techniques that I'm going to use, if this thing is spinning towards you, this is going to catch the blade and throw it, and you could be in serious trouble. So you really want to make sure you understand which direction this is going and how it's going to interact with the blade. So that's a safety statement. Now, I'm using a cardboard wheel on this side and a muslin wheel on this side. You could use a felt wheel if you want. They make some hard wheels with a felt surface. You can create your own with MDF, just lay out a blank. You can use a 6-inch high-speed grinder. I think the wheel velocity at the perimeter will actually be slower than the 8-inch slow speed. So again, don't run out and buy this particular grinder. Use what you've got first and understand its limitations before you invest in more. But I find this particular setup to be really invaluable for me. So on the left wheel, on the cardboard wheel, I use a little white rouge. On the muslin wheel, I use a green rouge. And I'll just show you, because it's easier to actually just watch how I do this than it is for me to explain it. We'll dress the wheels, and that's it. I've gone from a dull blade to a sharp blade that quickly. And I haven't demonstrated carving with this, but at this point it's razor sharp and is a great carving surface. So I don't know, I didn't time it, but you can measure the honing speed of this system in seconds, and quicker than I could go grab a stone out of my drawers for a stone method. So this is how I hone. And the beauty of this is that for any regular gouge, any concave gouge, I can roll the gouge around on here, I can roll the gouge here, and then I can even take the burr off on the inside with this. I'll demonstrate that shortly. But that's honing. And if you feel your chisels getting dull, just come back to this grinder, hone them in a matter of 10, 15 seconds and get back to work. It doesn't slow you down at all, and having that sharp chisel just makes a huge difference in the quality and the speed at which you can work. So I'm going to do the same thing now with this is a number 725. You can see the little, the concave surface on this. This is the bevel that I need to sharpen. And when I hone this, I'll get a little burr that I can't even feel really on the inside that I'll remove with the muslin wheel. So same exact procedure that we use with the bench chisel, and really doesn't take any longer. So there we go. I sort of lay the bevel on here, rotate it until I can feel the bevel. And just rotate the tool around. And there I am. And that is a freshly honed number 7, and again, really, really sharp.